Well, I thank you for joining us in this sixth video in this series. We have been thinking about some of the dynamics or the dimensions of discipleship, what kind of people God is calling us to be if we wish to be disciples of Jesus Christ. Talked about the necessity of making a choice, making a decision, and one has to decide, and then it's time to listen, it's time to learn. Then the matter of being submissive and yielding and obedient and doing what is taught, that is to follow instructions. That was our third point, and what it means to be a disciple. And then we came to the matter of learning by imitation, trying to make it a bit easier. We're simply trying to be like the master, what we've already read in Luke chapter 6 and verse 40. It's enough that the student should become like the teacher. The idea of imitation in the most recent video that I recorded. Hope you've had a chance to look at that. We've looked at a fifth dimension of discipleship, and that's the idea of commitment. And we come today to the sixth and next to the last video in this series, and also the studies are available online. I will remind you again that discipleship demands connecting with other disciples. I don't want to try to be confusing, but I do want to clarify. I want to try to understand. When I first thought about this point of connections, I was thinking about relationships. Disciples must be in relationship with God. Obviously, one who is a disciple has a vertical relationship with God. Excuse me, please. There is also relationship horizontal. There are relationships that in horizontal relationships with other disciples, and all of that can be said about relationships, but when I really began to think about that, began to analyze it, it did not connect with me. And so the word I'm using to try to talk about some of the aspects of discipleship is the word connecting. So discipleship demands that we connect with other disciples, that we connect with other disciples because we are disciples. Now, I want to say some things here. I want to say them quickly. Time does not permit in these brief videos the expansion of these and the development of them, but I believe that understanding discipleship is the key to understanding unity. Genuine followers of Jesus Christ, genuine learners, those who are disciples, those who are following the teacher have no trouble with unity. It's when we as followers begin to bring our own thoughts, our own teachings, our own desires, our own preferences, our own methods, there we find the stumbling blocks to unity. And so disciples follow the example of the teacher. Sometimes the Bible calls that a model, or a pattern. The pattern, let me say, is not just the teachings. I know that we have the reference in Romans chapter 6 to the pattern of the words of the teaching, to the model of the teaching, but the example is Jesus Christ. The pattern is the example. A pattern can be explained, but the explanation is not the pattern. The pattern of the New Testament teaching is the action that makes us like Jesus. And so following one teacher results in one group of followers. Now, here's the point we want to make about connections. Students who enjoy the same teacher, it doesn't matter whether we're talking high school, university, whatever it might be. When there's a group of students, they have the same teacher, they enjoy the same teacher, and they spend time together. There's camaraderie, there's talking about the teachings, there's study sessions, they're focusing on the points of commonality as they share relationship with one another because they share relationship with the teacher, because they're connected to the teacher, they're connected to one another. There were times when my younger sister and I, she's 18 months younger than I, didn't want to sit down at the table to eat at the same time because we'd had some kind of a spat, and my mother's favorite line was, "You're part of the same family, and so we'll sit down together." Because we were related to her, we were related to one another, brother and sister. And the same thing is true in discipleship. Because we're related to the master, because we're related to the teacher, we're related to one another. And so what the New Testament talks about is the idea that disciples spend time together because they are disciples. So when they're spending time together, the focus of the time they spend together is their discipleship. They're remembering, they're sharing, they're encouraging, they're thinking about the things that unite them. And one of the problems we have so often in the modern church is that there are too many activities, and they're sometimes characterized as church activities, but they say nothing about and have nothing to do with our common allegiances, our common faith, the things that bind us together. The earliest disciples assembled specifically. There was a specific time that they assembled on the first day of the week, because that was the day of the resurrection. That was the day that they remembered together what bound them together. There were certain activities, the things they did in worship, the things they did in service, the things they did in teaching, the prayers that they shared. And so we can understand that the assemblies, the connections of those early disciples, the why and the how, those things were always based upon the fact that they were disciples of the same teacher. And so here we have the modern church with so much to learn, because there are too many churches today who have altered the definition of shared discipleship. The point I would make is that discipleship is a lot easier when we're in class, when we're around the teacher, when we're around other learners. That facilitates our connection one with another. There's probably no better example of what I'm talking about than the description of the first disciples in Acts chapter 2 after the preaching of Peter on the day of Pentecost. Because when we begin to think about the kind of life that they shared, beginning in chapter 2 and verse 42, it says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayers, and all came upon every soul, wonders and signs being done. They were selling possessions and belongings and distributing them one to another. They were sharing life together. They were teaching together. They were worshiping together. And so here's the point. To facilitate our connection, students who enjoy the same teacher enjoy spending time together. There's camaraderie, there's talking about the teachings, focusing on the common choices that we made, what we've learned, the actions that we're trying to develop, and the commitments that we've made. May God bless us as we connect one with another, remembering that being connected is an essential part of being a disciple of Jesus Christ.